If you're studying A-level philosophy and ethics, subscribe. I'm covering the entire course on this channel. This video and the one that follows it are different from everything else in this series. Here, I'm not explaining a theory in general terms. I'm doing something that will directly prepare you for the Section B question on your Edexcel paper, a close paragraph by paragraph annotation of the set text itself. The text is William Barclay's chapter on situation ethics that's taken from his book Ethics in a Permissive Society, which was published in 1971. And this is Edexcel Anthology Extract 1 for the Religion and Ethics Paper 2. For each section of the text I will show you, which you will need to find in a copy of the document physically in front of you, we're going to do three things. First, we're going to look at a summary of what Barclay is saying, and that will pop up in blue at the top of the paragraph. And that will provide any context that helps you understand it. Second, you're going to have a close analysis of some of the language and the argument that he makes. That will pop up in lighter grey coloured boxes, and there will already be a pre-populated highlighting on the text itself. And thirdly, there'll be an application connecting the passage to wider debates in ethics and asking some of those evaluative questions that we're not going to answer here in the video, but they're going to give you an opportunity to go away and think about and wrestle with so that you've got extra things that will help you earn marks in those essays. Now here, video part 1 covers the opening of the text all the way through to Barclay's first 3 objections. The part 2 video will cover his 4th objection, and I'll also look at his extended discussion of law and his conclusion. So, in front of you, my suggestion is you keep a physical copy of the text that you can annotate. You'll need some highlighters and a pen to highlight and annotate the text. So treat this as if it were like a study session. So, opening paragraph, pause when you need to. You can highlight already the areas of this paragraph that I've done so on the screen. Here's the summary and some context. Barclay opens his essay not by attacking situation ethics, but by describing the assumption that most people bring to ethics. And that is that morality is essentially like a rule book, a collection of pre-made decisions that we apply to situations rather than construct afresh each time. It's helpful for you to know that Barclay was writing in 1971, 5 years after Joseph Fletcher's book caused a storm in both academic theology and popular religious culture. He was one of the most widely read theologians of the 20th century. His daily study Bible series sold millions of copies. He was writing for ordinary Christian believers, not academic philosophers. And that matters in this essay, because his tone throughout the essay is very accessible, it's very fair, and it has that pastoral awareness that you would expect from a minister. He was a Scottish minister of the church. So I want to draw your attention to the word prefabricated. He says here it means that we have got, so we think, a series of prefabricated rules and laws and principles which we accept and apply. Now this is a very loaded term. Prefabricated things are manufactured in advance, before they ever encounter the specific situation they'll be used in. Now Barclay is not yet criticising this approach, but he is describing it. But the word choice here signals a mild irony. Prefabricated rules are convenient, but are they adequate? I also want to draw your attention to the phrase saves us from the difficult and often dangerous task of making our own judgments and deciding things for ourselves. This is a really significant sentence. Barclay is acknowledging something that Fletcher also acknowledged, that most people prefer not to exercise independent moral judgment. Rules reduce our anxiety. They transfer the burden of responsibility from the individual to the tradition. So I want you to ask yourself, is this how most people actually approach ethics? Do they calculate consequences each time, or do they apply inherent rules? This connection directly to Barclay's central objection later, that most people are not equipped for the freedom situation ethics demands, he's planting that very seed here. And this also frames the fundamental tension between deontological theories in ethics, like natural law and Kantian ethics, and that provides exactly the prefabricated rules that Barclay's describing, and the teleological theories in ethics, utilitarianism, situation ethics, which reject them and demand fresh reasoning each time. In the next paragraph, Barclay introduces Fletcher and summarizes his central claim. And this is a fair and accurate summary. Barclay is a very generous reader of Fletcher, and that matters because it makes his later criticisms in the essay more credible. He's not misinterpreting the theory in order to go and knock it all down. I want to draw your attention to the phrases here: goodness and badness, and properties and predicates. Highlight those phrases. I'm going to zoom in on the bottom of the paragraph first. The philosophical distinction between properties and predicates is a key move here. You see, a property belongs to an object intrinsically. Fire is hot regardless of who observes it or what context it's in. And a predicate is attributed to something in a particular context. Whether good or bad, it is not built into an action in the same way that heat is built into a fire. So moral qualities are descriptions of how actions function in situations. They're not inherent features of the actions themselves. And this is what philosophers call anti-essentialism in ethics. Barclay is presenting it fairly here before he later goes on to evaluate it. Anti-essentialism is something that Fletcher referred to, where you have moral qualities that are not built into actions in the way that physical properties are built into objects. And that's what's being described here by Barclay. And this whole paragraph connects us directly to a central debate in meta-ethics between moral realism, the view that moral facts are objective and mind independent, and anti-realism, which denies this. And Fletcher is an anti-realist about moral properties. And Barclay will later on challenge this idea. So ask yourself at this point, is Barclay's summary of Fletcher fair? Does it capture the nuance of his position, including the one absolute of agape? Or does it present the theory in a form that is easier to criticize? Evaluating a secondary text's reading of a primary source is exactly the kind of critical thinking that this section in your Edexcel exam rewards. The next paragraph, Barclay makes an important clarificatory point that students often miss. The situationist is not an antinomian. He does not start from moral scratch. He enters situations carrying the full weight of moral tradition. He simply refuses to treat any of it as absolutely binding. Now, Barclay in this paragraph also quotes Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German Lutheran theologian who was executed by the Nazis in April 1945 for his involvement in a plot to assassinate Hitler. Bonhoeffer is historically significant here. He was a deeply principled Christian thinker who concluded that love and justice required him to participate in political violence. His life is itself an example of situationist reasoning under very extreme pressure. So I want to draw your attention to what's highlighted. The Bonhoeffer quotation does real philosophical work. Bonhoeffer said, "Principles are only tools in the hand of God, soon to be thrown away as unserviceable." It shows that the refusal to be bound absolutely by principles is not an idea that's been invented by 1960s liberals. In fact, it has clear roots in serious, costly Christian witness. Bonhoeffer paid for his convictions with his life. And I want to draw you down also to the phrase at the bottom. He completely refuses to be shackled or bound by anything. This is a paradoxically absolute idea in its formulation. The situationist has one absolute commitment: freedom from every rule except love. That is itself a kind of principle. Now, this whole paragraph is addressing the most common misunderstanding of situation ethics, that it is moral chaos, which it isn't. It is morally informed, but not morally enslaved. It's informed by tradition, but it isn't bound by it. Now, we also need to connect this to Fletcher's three approaches: legalism, antinomianism, situationism. Barclay here is confirming that situation ethics is genuinely what is known as the middle way. And students who can explain this distinction, informed by tradition but not bound by it, demonstrate real understanding of the theory in their essays. The next paragraph. Here, Barclay introduces the single absolute at the heart of situation ethics: agape. He quotes Fletcher's first two propositions directly, showing that he is working from the primary text of Joseph Fletcher. And so I want to draw your attention simply to the repetition of the phrase "nothing else." The ultimate norm of Christian decisions is love, nothing else. Only one thing is intrinsically good, namely love, nothing else. And this repetition of nothing else in both propositions is philosophically deliberate. Fletcher is not saying that love is the most important thing among several important things. He is saying it is the only thing with intrinsic moral value. Everything else, truth, justice, chastity, loyalty, is only contingently good. Also, it's worth noting that Barclay's tone remains neutral and expository here. He is taking the theory seriously before he criticizes it, and that really strengthens the credibility of Barclay's objections when he gets to them. This paragraph is the foundational claim of the entire theory. You should be able to explain why it is both philosophically radical, stripping moral value from everything except love, and theologically grounded in the gospel, the good news of Jesus, with his command to love unconditionally. But I want you to ask yourself this question: if love is the only intrinsic good, what happens when love appears to conflict with justice or honesty? This question anticipates the next section, which is one of the most important in the entire extract. This next paragraph. Barclay was one of the great biblical Greek scholars of the 20th century, and this is the passage where his expertise shows most clearly. He distinguishes the four Greek words for love: eros, philia, storge, and agape, with characteristic precision and accessibility. So I want to hone in here on this definition that he gives for agape. Agape is unconquerable goodwill. It is the determination to always seek the other man's highest good, no matter what he does to you. So the definition of agape as unconquerable goodwill, the determination always to seek the other man's highest good no matter what he does to you, is the most precise and practical, useful definition in the entire extract. And there are three features that stand out. Number one, it is unconquerable. It's not diminished by what others do to you. It's a determination, number two. A deliberate act of will, not a feeling or an emotion. And three, it is directed at the other's highest good, not their immediate comfort or preference, but their genuine long-term well-being. I also want to draw your attention to the banana skin analogy, where he says falling in love is like stepping on a banana skin. It happens, and that is all there is to it. So this banana skin analogy is typically Barclay. Memorable, accessible, accurate. Romantic love happens to you. Agape is something you commit to. And that's the point he's making here. And so this paragraph is essential for your essays because it provides the most precise definition of agape in the whole anthology. You should use Barclay's definition, remember it, unconquerable goodwill, the determination to seek the other's highest good, rather than any other vague formulation. It's also worth noting that this whole section connects to Joseph Fletcher's fourth proposition. Love wills the neighbour's good, whether we like them or not. Barclay's definition confirms this exactly. Agape is not conditional on liking the person. It is a willed commitment to their well-being regardless of how we feel. This next paragraph, Barclay now uses Fletcher's thought experiments to show situationist reasoning in action. These dilemmas are designed to force a confrontation with the complexity that rigid rules simply cannot handle. They're not hypothetical curiosities, they are philosophical instruments designed to reveal what morality actually requires when principles conflict. So I want to draw your attention first to the baby versus Mona Lisa. Suppose, for instance, a house catches fire and in it there is a baby and the original of the Mona Lisa. And so this dilemma is deceptively simple. It establishes the principle that persons have greater value than objects, a principle most people would accept immediately and instinctively. But this is Barclay setting up the harder case. The father, let me draw you to this attention in the section. The father versus the doctor is genuinely agonizing here. He says, but think of this one. Suppose that in the burning house there is your aged father, an old man with the days of his usefulness at an end, and a doctor. Now notice that the father is described here as an old man with the days of his usefulness at an end. This is not a morally neutral bit of language. It's designed to make the calculation as difficult for you as possible. Utilitarian reasoning would save the doctor. Natural law might insist on the father because family duty is a primary precept. Situation ethics will ask simply, which choice expresses the greatest love? Which is love? Which you can see at the bottom of the paragraph. Now, this whole paragraph with these dilemmas are excellent essay materials because they reveal the point of disagreement between ethical theories rather than just describing them. Barclay is showing you where the differences can be found in the different theories. Utilitarianism calculates aggregate outcomes. Natural law applies absolute precepts. And situation ethics asks what love demands in this specific situation. But the question I want you to really think about after reading all of this is whether situationist reasoning actually is more honest about moral complexity than rule-based theories? Or does it simply relocate the difficulty, replacing which rule applies with what does love require, and never actually resolves it? What do you think? And this paragraph is one of the most morally disturbing passages in the entire extract. Deliberately so. Barclay's presenting Fletcher's most extreme case study here to show how far situationist reasoning can go. And the historical context of this is set in 18th century America, the westward expansion through the Appalachian Mountains. This was a real world of violent conflict, extreme danger, and impossible choices. Fletcher uses it precisely because the moral stakes are absolute. Life and death, not convenience or preference. So I want to draw your attention to the contrast between the two mothers that are mentioned here, where it says a Scottish woman had a baby at the breast, and on this occasion there was a Negro woman in the party. The contrast between these two mothers is the philosophical heart of the passage. Both of them are acting from love. The Scottish mother's love for her baby leads to the deaths of everyone. The second mother's love for the whole party leads her to kill her own child. And Barclay's question here, which action was love, is not rhetorical. It's a genuinely open question. The situationist answer is that the second mother's action was the more loving one. It saved the greater number. But notice the cost. The theory requires a mother to strangle her own infant, and it calls this love. And then there's the phrase I want to draw your attention to. Here is the kind of decision with which the situationist confronts us. This signals that Barclay is about to begin his critique. He's shown the theory as its most challenging, and now he's going to respond. And this paragraph is one of the most powerful case studies for your exam, because it forces you to confront the real implications of teleological reasoning. Both utilitarianism and situation ethics would reach similar conclusions in this dilemma. The greatest good for the greatest number. But neither of them can escape the moral weight of what the conclusion requires. So I wanted to ask you this question. Does the fact that situationist reasoning can justify this action make it a stronger theory because it is honest about moral complexity? Or is it a weaker one because it permits something that most people would find morally catastrophic? What do you think? This next section, Barclay introduces the cab driver anecdote, one of the lighter passages in the extract compared to what we've just been listening to, but philosophically very significant still. A lifelong Republican in America votes against his party because he believes it is the right thing to do. His instinct, that loyalty to a principle, must sometimes yield to a higher obligation, and this is exactly the situationist's instinct. So I want to draw your attention to the bottom of the paragraph. The phrase, there are principles, of course, but they can only advise. They do not have the right of veto. And that is one of the most quotable lines in the entire text, and one of the clearest statements of the situationist position. It doesn't say principles are useless. It says they are advisory, not commanding. And this is a crucial distinction in your essays. The situationist respects the accumulated wisdom of moral tradition. He simply refuses to let it override love when the two conflict. And this whole paragraph connects directly to Bonhoeffer's earlier quotation, "Principles are tools, not masters." The cab driver example here makes this accessible and more human. We've all had moments in life where we felt that doing the right thing required us to set aside a rule we normally would follow. So I want to ask you this question to help you evaluate the text. Is the cab driver example actually a good illustration of situation ethics, or does it prove too much? The cab driver is voting differently from his family tradition, but is that really a morally significant decision in the same category as the wilderness trail we heard about, or the Bergmeyer case? Barclay may be using a relatively trivial example here to introduce a principle that will be applied in far more serious contexts. This more lengthier paragraph refers to the Bergmeyer case. And this is the most famous case study in the entire situation ethics debate. Fletcher's Bergmeyer case, which Barclay calls sacrificial adultery, takes place in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War in the chaos of Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe. The historical context is not hypothetical. This reflects the real moral landscape of 1945, a world in which normal rules had been shattered and human beings faced impossible choices. Now, Mrs. Bergmeyer is a real person in Fletcher's account, not a hypothetical construction. A wife, a mother, separated from her family by the machinery of war, finds the only legal route back to them runs through an act that every traditional moral code would condemn as adultery. So I want to draw your attention to what some of the things are that have been highlighted here. This case is designed to make the traditional prohibition feel inadequate. Look at the emotional architecture of Barclay's telling here. The husband searching for weeks. The children, 2 in a Russian detention school, 1 hiding alone in a cellar. The family that get reunited, but they're still incomplete. The baby Dietrich, loved most of all. You can see those things highlighted. This is not incidental sentimentality. Barclay is presenting the case as Fletcher presents it, with full emotional weight. Because the point is that rules feel inadequate when you are confronted with a real human family in genuine need. The final 3 questions that I've highlighted here. So what? Right or wrong? Adultery or love? Which? These are all left unanswered at this point. Barclay is making you sit with the discomfort before he responds. This is a philosophically honest and a very pedagogically effective moment in his essay. This whole paragraph, this full case study here, is one of the one most likely to appear in your exam. And you've got to be able to explain what it illustrates. That in extreme situations, an act normally condemned as wrong can be the most loving available choice. And then you need to evaluate it. But to help you evaluate it, I want to ask you this question. Does the Bergmeyer case prove that situation ethics is correct? Or does it prove that extreme situations produce extreme measures regardless of what ethical theory you hold? A natural law theorist might argue that the double effect doctrine provides a better framework for analysing this case. A Kantian might argue that the act cannot be universalized regardless of its outcomes. And a situationist, the act was love. It reunited a family. It brought Dietrich into the world, who became the most loved of all the children. What do you think? This next paragraph is the first of his response. He now begins his four-part response to the theory, and this is his first objection, which is interesting because he explicitly says it is a criticism of Fletcher's presentation rather than of the theory itself. And again, this is intellectually honest and philosophically very careful. So I want to draw your attention to the objection here that he builds. It's methodological. Fletcher builds his case almost entirely from extreme, unusual wartime cases. It says here, Fletcher's illustrations are drawn from the abnormal, the unusual, the extraordinary. When you think about it, a woman in a Soviet prison camp, mothers on the wilderness trail facing Indian attacks, blood feuds in the Middle East. These are genuine moral dilemmas, but they are not the dilemmas most people will face most of the time. And Barclay's point is subtle. He's not saying extreme situations don't exist or that love is the wrong criterion in them. He's saying that you cannot build a general ethics from exceptional cases. Most moral decisions are mundane. How to treat a colleague at work, whether to tell a difficult truth, how to balance competing family obligations. These situations are not well served by a theory that has been calibrated to wartime extremes. And there's a bit to highlight at the bottom here. It's much easier to agree that extraordinary situations need extraordinary measures than to think that there are no laws for ordinary everyday life. So this whole paragraph is a powerful methodological critique that applies beyond situation ethics. Any ethical theory, in fact, that derives its principles primarily from extreme cases, such as trolley cart problems, burning buildings, wartime decisions, is vulnerable to this objection. But we need to ask some questions to evaluate. Let me ask you, is Barclay right that ordinary ethics and extraordinary ethics might need different frameworks? Or is the situationist correct that love is the right criterion in all situations, mundane or extreme? This question connects to whether situation ethics is a complete moral theory or just a theory for exceptional circumstances. What do you think? This next paragraph here, Barclay explicitly flags this as a more serious than his first objection, his second objection here. It strikes at something fundamental about the relationship between freedom and human nature. Let's zoom in to what's been highlighted. The right use of freedom in our relationships with others depends on love. The structure of the argument is careful. Barclay doesn't say that freedom is bad here. He says the right use of freedom depends on love. And then he delivers his essential claim. Most people do not love perfectly enough to use freedom well. Now, this is not a theoretical objection, it's an empirical and anthropological one. Barclay's observing human behaviour across decades of his own pastoral ministry in a church setting, and concludes that most people, when left to their own moral judgment, will rationalise their desires as love. He's put here, but if there is no love, then freedom can become license, freedom can become selfishness, and even cruelty. And I want to zoom in on the word license there, because it's doing some important work. There's a thin line between situationist freedom judging each case afresh, guided by genuine love, and mere license, where any impulse can be justified as loving. Barclay's worry here is that in practice, most people, he says, cannot reliably tell the difference. This paragraph connects to the self-deception objection that we have looked at throughout this series. Barclay is raising it here from his own pastoral experience rather than philosophical abstraction. And that makes his objections really strong. But we must ask this question. Is Barclay's concern here about human nature too pessimistic? Or is it a realistic assessment of moral psychology? And does the history of how people actually behave support his caution or Fletcher's optimism? Have a think about that. This next paragraph is the single most important paragraph in the entire extract for exam purposes. It contains Barclay's central thesis in its clearest and most memorable form. He says this is probably true. The concession that he makes here to John A.T. Robinson, this is probably true, is significant. Barclay is not saying that Fletcher is philosophically wrong. He is not saying agape is the wrong criterion. He is saying that the theory is right for the wrong species, or rather for a more morally developed version of the species that we actually are. And I want to look at the word crutch here. Man therefore still needs the crutch and the protection of law. This word crutch is important. If you think about it, a crutch is not the ideal way to walk. It's what you need when you cannot yet walk unaided. And Barclay is saying law is not better than love, but it is necessary given human weakness, in the same way that a crutch is not better than healthy legs, but it is necessary given you might have an injury. And this is the most quotable passage in the extract and the most important for your essays. You need to memorize the structure of the argument. Take a look at it on the screen there. Premise 1. If all men were saints, situation ethics would be perfect. Premise 2. But man has not yet come of age. Conclusion. Therefore, we still need law. It's also worth noting how generous Barclay is to Fletcher. He's not dismissing the theory, he's conceding its ideal validity while questioning its practical applicability. That nuanced position is philosophically far more sophisticated than him just flatly rejecting Fletcher. And what I want you to think about here is observing the way Barclay is writing this, observing the way that he is wrestling with it, but in a very respectful and generous way, models the kind of evaluation that examiners reward you when you write essays. The final paragraph for this part 1 of the video series is Barclay's third objection, which challenges Fletcher's anti-essentialism directly. He gives 2 concrete examples here of acts that he believes are intrinsically wrong: introducing young people to drugs and destroying families, regardless of the loving intention that's behind them. So let me draw your attention here, specifically to drug addiction. It says experiments which can lead to drug addiction, to break up a family relationship in the name of so-called love. Well, these examples are carefully chosen for a 1971 audience. Drug experimentation was a significant social concern in Britain and in America. Family breakdown was a pastoral reality that Barclay himself encountered regularly in his ministry. I also want to highlight the phrase so-called love. This is a really sharp phrase in the way that Barclay uses it, in the name of so-called love. Barclay's suggesting that what gets labelled love in justifying such acts is not genuine agape at all. It is self-deception or rationalization dressed in the language of compassion. His doubt about whether goodness and badness can be treated as purely contextual predicates connects to natural law theory here. He says, I'm very doubtful if the distinction between goodness and badness can be so disposed of. Natural law theory, remind you, the view that some acts are intrinsically ordered toward or against human flourishing, regardless of intention or outcome. And this whole paragraph is one of the strongest passages here for defending moral absolutism against situation ethics. Barclay's in effect arguing for a position that is more close to natural law here. That some acts are wrong in themselves, not merely wrong in most situations. But I do want to leave you with this question of evaluation. Are Barclay's two examples here well chosen? Could a determined situationist argue that there are conceivable circumstances in which either act might be the most loving option? Or does the near universal harm that they cause make them effectively absolute prohibitions, even within a situationist framework?